You didn't build anything, Maya. You executed my vision. There's a difference. My boss said that to me with a straight face, sitting across a glass conference table on the 34th floor, while my slide deck, the one I had spent 11 weeks rebuilding from scratch, glowed behind him on a 90-inch screen. The client sitting next to him had just signed a $3.2 million contract. The ink was still wet, and I was about to be handed a box. I want to tell you something first, before I get into what happened next. People always ask me, why didn't you just leave sooner? And I get it. From the outside, it looks obvious, but when you're inside it, when you've given 3 years of your life to something and you still believe, genuinely believe, that the next project will be the one that finally gets you recognized, leaving feels like failure. It took me a long time to understand that staying was the real failure, that I had confused loyalty with surrender. My name is Maya, and for 3 years I was the invisible engine behind one of the fastest-growing brand strategy consultancies in Chicago. The firm was called Crestline Partners. 12 people, big reputation, clients ranging from regional hospital networks to mid-sized tech companies that wanted to look like they had a soul. My boss and the founder was a man named Derek Holt, tall, silver-haired, the kind of guy who wore slim-cut blazers and quoted Simon Sinek in pitch meetings like it was scripture. He had the handshake. He had the confidence. He had the LinkedIn following. What he did not have, though nobody outside the firm knew it, was the ability to actually build the strategies he sold. That was me. I had come to Crestline at 26 with a master's degree in organizational communications from Northwestern and enough naive ambition to light up a city block. Derek had interviewed me himself. He was magnetic in that meeting, asked sharp questions, listened hard, made me feel like I was the answer to a problem he'd been carrying for years. He hired me as a senior brand strategist, which sounded impressive until I realized that in a 12-person firm, the title meant almost nothing. There was no junior strategist beneath me. There was no clear career path above me. There was just Derek, and then everyone else. The work was real, though. I'll give it that. The problems were genuinely hard, and I loved solving them. In my first 6 months, I redesigned the messaging framework for a regional healthcare network that had 3 competing brands under one umbrella and had been hemorrhaging patient trust for 2 years. I interviewed their staff, mapped their patient journey, identified exactly where the communication broke down, and built them a brand architecture that their CMO later called the clearest strategic document she'd received in 15 years of working with consultants. Derek presented it. He flew to their headquarters in Indianapolis and stood at the front of their boardroom and walked them through every page. I watched it happen over Zoom from a WeWork on Michigan Avenue because Derek had decided at the last minute that the team wouldn't be attending. When the client applauded at the end of the presentation, Derek said, "This is what Crestline does." Not, "This is what Maya built." Not, "Our strategists spent 4 months on this." Just, "This is what Crestline does." Meaning, this is what Derek Holt does. I told myself it was fine. I was building a portfolio. I was learning. These things take time. I told myself that for 2 more years. The pattern, once I finally let myself see it, was so consistent it was almost elegant. Derek would bring in the client, usually through golf, through his alumni network, through the kind of connections that come when you've been a white man in business for 30 years in the same city. He'd run the pitch himself, charming and broad and full of aspirational language. Then he'd come back to the office and drop the project on my desk. "This one's yours," he'd say, like he was doing me a favor. "I trust your instincts." I would disappear for weeks. Research, interviews, competitive analysis, positioning frameworks, narrative architecture. I would build the thing from the foundation up. Then Derek would schedule the delivery meeting, fly or drive to the client, and present my work as the natural output of his firm's proprietary methodology, a phrase I'm fairly certain invented because it sounded expensive. He never lied outright. He never said, "I built this." He just never said he didn't. In the consulting world, the principal owns the work. That's the assumption. And Derek let that assumption do his dirty work for him. What I didn't know. What I had never thought to check. Because why would I? I was 28 and grateful for the job. Was exactly what my employment contract said about that work. The day it all broke open started like most bad days do, quietly. I had been working for 4 months on a brand repositioning project for a company called Hartwell Dynamics. They were a mid-size industrial equipment manufacturer based in Naperville that was trying to pivot towards sustainability messaging to attract a younger B2B client base. The project was the biggest Crestline had landed in 2 years, $3.2 million over an 18-month engagement. Derek had wooed their CEO, a man named Gerald Hartwell, on the back nine of a golf course in Lake Forest. Then he handed it to me. I gave everything to that project. I traveled to their facilities in Naperville 4 times. I interviewed their engineers, their sales team, their legacy clients. I found the thing that was actually true about their company, not the greenwashing their marketing team wanted to slap on top of a 50-year-old industrial brand, but a genuine story about durability and craftsmanship that actually mapped to what sustainability meant in their sector. I built a complete brand system, a new positioning statement, a messaging hierarchy, a visual identity brief, a 12-month content roadmap, and a 74-slide deck that I had revised 9 times. I was proud of it, genuinely deeply proud. It was the best work I had ever done. Derek presented it on a Tuesday. I was not invited to the meeting. He texted me at 2:14 p.m. signed, 3.2 M Zals. Gerald loved it. Big win for the firm. I sat at my desk and felt something that I can only describe as the specific sadness of watching someone else open your gift. I gave it a day. Then I walked into Derek's office and asked, carefully, calmly, professionally, if there was any way to discuss my role going forward. I had now led strategy on 4 of the firm's 6 largest engagements. I wanted a title that reflected that, a principal role. I wanted to be in client meetings, at least the delivery meetings for projects I'd built. And I wanted to talk about compensation because I had looked at industry benchmarks and I was making $71,000 a year, while the market rate for someone doing my actual job was closer to $115,000. Derek leaned back in his chair and did the thing he always did when he was uncomfortable. He rearranged the items on his desk. His stapler, his coffee cup, a small glass cube some client had given him. Maya, you're incredible at what you do, he said. You know I think that. I waited. But the client's by Derek Holt. That's the product. You're part of the engine, and the engine has to stay under the hood. If I start putting you in front of clients, they're going to wonder what they're paying me for. Under the hood? He actually said that. I asked about the compensation. He told me the firm was going through a growth investment phase and that cash was tied up in operations. He'd revisit it at the end of the quarter. He said this, I would later realize, as a way of ending conversations. He had probably said end of the quarter to me 4 times in 3 years and meant it exactly 0 of those times. I left his office. I went to the bathroom, ran cold water over my wrists, and looked at myself in the mirror for a long moment. That night, for the first time in 3 years, I didn't open my work laptop. Instead, I opened my employment contract. I'd signed it when I was 26, excited, not thinking clearly about anything except the offer letter and the health insurance and the fact that I had a real job with real responsibilities. I had skimmed it then. I read it now, word by word, sitting on my couch with a highlighter and the yellow legal pad. I got to section 9 and stopped. It was the intellectual property clause, standard boilerplate in most employment contracts. Anything you create in the scope of your employment belongs to the employer. I had expected that. What I had not expected was what followed it. There was a carve-out, a narrow, specific carve-out that Derek's original attorney, probably a cheap generalist he'd hired when he first incorporated the firm in 2015, had written to exclude certain categories of independently developed materials. The exact language was dense, but what it meant was this. Any strategic framework, original research methodology, or analytical model that had been developed prior to or independently of a specific client engagement was not automatically assigned to Crestline. I read it 4 times. Then I made a list. Every proprietary framework I had brought into that firm, the stakeholder mapping model I'd developed during my master's thesis, the narrative layering system I'd built on my own time in my first year, before I'd even applied it to a client. The research interview methodology I'd codified from scratch because Crestline didn't have one. Those weren't Crestline's, they were mine. And every major project I had delivered in 3 years, including Hartwell Dynamics, was built on those frameworks. I didn't sleep much that night, but when I did, I slept well. I called a lawyer the next morning. Her name was Renata, a friend of a friend from Northwestern who had gone into employment and intellectual property law and built a boutique practice in River North. I hadn't spoken to her in 2 years. I texted her at 7 a.m. and asked if she had 30 minutes. She called me at 7:15. I sat in my car in the parking garage beneath my apartment building and read her Section 9 over the phone. There was a pause. "Who drafted this contract?" she asked. Derek apparently used a template when he started the firm. I think he modified it himself. Another pause. "Maya, this carve-out is incredibly broad, and if your frameworks predate your employment or were developed independently, they may not be assignable under this language at all." That's what I thought. "Do you have documentation, timestamps, draft files, emails?" I thought about the Google Drive folder I'd maintained since graduate school, the one with every framework I'd ever built, dated and versioned, going back to 2019. "Yes," I said, "all of it." "Then we need to talk," Renata said. "In person." I met her at her office 2 days later. I brought my laptop, my contract, and a printed timeline I had spent the night before assembling, every major Crestline project, which of my frameworks it used, and the dated documentation proving those frameworks existed before the project began. Renata reviewed it for 40 minutes, while I drank bad coffee and watched the Chicago River from her window. When she looked up, she wasn't smiling exactly, but there was something sharp in her expression. "Here's what we're looking at," she said. "The Mises paradox. I see it constantly with small firms. The founder was so focused on keeping overhead down, he used a cut-rate contract template and didn't hire a real IP attorney. That carve-out was probably meant to protect him from something, but it was drafted so broadly that it does the opposite." I set down my coffee. "What does that mean practically?" "It means you may own the core intellectual architecture of the work Crestline has been selling. And it means Derek Hartwell is about to present an 18-month engagement to a $3.2 million client using tools that may legally belong to you." She recommended a cease and desist, but not yet. First, we needed to register the key frameworks. She filed for copyright registration on 3 of the most foundational documents, the ones that formed the backbone of virtually every major project I had delivered. It took 8 days. It cost just under $1,000. While we waited, I did something that felt small in the moment and turned out to matter enormously. I had remembered, over the years, that Derek had a habit of leaving voicemails when he was under pressure. Not texts, not emails, voicemails, the way older men sometimes do, and I had a habit, developed in a season of deep anxiety early in my tenure, of saving them. I had never thought about why. Some part of me must have understood, even then, that documentation was survival. I went through my phone. 42 saved voicemails from Derek over 3 years. I listened to a few. "Maya, this is the 3rd time this week you've missed my expectation on timelines. I don't know what the problem is, but if you can't keep up, I'm going to have to reconsider whether this role is the right fit for you." That was from a week when I'd worked until 2 a.m., 4 nights in a row to cover for a deliverable Derek had promised a client without consulting me first. You need to understand something. The work doesn't leave this building with your name on it. It leaves with mine. That's the arrangement. If you're not comfortable with that, you're not comfortable here. That one was from 18 months ago, after I had asked, once, politely, whether I could be acknowledged in a case study. The clients don't need to know your name, Maya. They need to know Crestline's name. Your job is to make me look good. That's what I'm paying you for. Do your job. I forwarded all 42 to Renata. She called me an hour later. "Where did you save these?" "My personal phone. I never deleted them." "These establish a pattern of conduct," she said quietly. "If Derek claims your departure was abandonment or breach, these reframe it as constructive dismissal. He was actively suppressing your professional identity. That matters." Then she said, "Are you ready to make a move?" Hartwell Dynamics had a quarterly leadership summit every year. Their Q3 summit was happening in 3 weeks at the Loews Chicago Hotel downtown. Derek was presenting the brand rollout, my brand rollout, to Hartwell's entire executive team and board of directors, 40 people in a room, Gerald Hartwell at the head of the table. Renata served Derek the cease and desist 6 days before the summit. He called me 17 minutes later. "What the hell is this?" he said. "Not a question." His voice had that dangerous flatness that I recognize from the voicemails. "It's a notice," I said. "The frameworks underlying the Hartwell deliverable are registered in my name. Crestline doesn't have the rights to present or monetize them without a licensing agreement." "You work for me." "I'm an employee, Derek, but Section 9 of my contract carves out independently developed intellectual property. Renata can walk you through the specifics if you'd like." There was a long silence. "You'll never work in this industry again." I had expected that. I had prepared for it. I still felt the threat land somewhere in my chest. That cold, familiar feeling of being someone's subordinate, someone whose future they believed they controlled. "I'll take my chances," I said, and ended the call. He did not reach out again directly. His attorney sent a response letter claiming the frameworks were developed in the scope of my employment and therefore belonged to Crestline. Renata responded with the time-stamped documentation, the Google Drive files, the graduate school metadata, the version histories. She also attached the voicemails. The ones where Derek said, explicitly, that the work left the building with his name, not mine. That my job was to make him look good. His attorney went quiet for 5 days. I resigned on a Wednesday. I gave 1 week's notice, which was all my contract required. I did not explain myself to my co-workers beyond saying I had decided to start something of my own. Some of them looked relieved on my behalf. One of them, a junior analyst named Priya, who had watched 3 years of the same pattern from her desk, 12 feet away from mine, hugged me in the hallway and whispered, "It's about time." I spent the next 4 days incorporating. Meridian Brand Strategy, LLC, filed with the Illinois Secretary of State in under an hour online. I built a 1-page website. I reached out to 3 former contacts I had made through my own work on client projects, people who had my personal email and had occasionally reached out to me directly with questions. One of them was the CMO from the healthcare network in Indianapolis. Another was a VP of marketing at an Naperville company I'd consulted with adjacent to the Hartwell engagement. I didn't solicit Hartwell. Renata advised against it while negotiations were ongoing. The summit happened on a Thursday. I wasn't there. I want to be clear about that. I did not walk into that room in a red dress. I did not hijack a screen. That's not how this actually works, and I think it's important to say so because what really happened was both less cinematic and more devastating. Derek presented. I heard about it later from someone who was in the room. He was 20 minutes into the rollout when Gerald Hartwell interrupted him. Gerald had received an email that morning. Renata had sent it, on my behalf, directly to Gerald's office. Not to Derek, not to Crestline's account. To Gerald Hartwell personally, because Gerald had given me his business card 2 years earlier at a site visit, and I had kept it. The email was a single paragraph, professionally written, attaching the copyright registrations and the cease and desist, and a brief summary of the IP dispute currently underway. It closed by noting that Meridian Brand Strategy would be happy to discuss a direct engagement to complete the rollout under clear and proper legal ownership. Gerald read it before he walked into the summit. So when Derek was 20 minutes in, Gerald raised his hand and asked one question. "Derek, is there an IP dispute currently attached to this work?" Derek said there was a minor contractor disagreement that was being handled. Gerald said, "My legal team reviewed the documentation this morning. This doesn't look minor." The meeting was paused. Gerald's in-house counsel got on the phone with Renata that afternoon. By the end of the business day, Hartwell Dynamics had suspended their engagement with Crestline, pending resolution of the IP question. Within 2 weeks, Gerald signed a new contract with Meridian. It was a smaller scope than the original $3.2 million at $800,000 for the second phase of the rollout, which was mine to complete. But it was mine. my name on the contract, my LLC on the invoice, my framework legitimately. Derek's attorney came back to the table 4 days after the Hartwell news. The settlement was straightforward. Crestline would not contest ownership of the 3 registered frameworks. I would not pursue further legal action or approach other former Crestline clients with the IP claim, though I was free to compete in the open market. There was a modest financial component that I'm not able to detail, but which covered Renata's fees with room to spare. Derek sent me one final text 2 weeks after the settlement was signed. It said, "You burned this down over your ego. I hope it was worth it." I didn't respond. But I thought about it. I thought about the voicemail where he said my job was to make him look good. I thought about every delivery meeting I watched through a Zoom screen, every presentation where Crestline took the bow for something I had built in the dark. I thought about the word he used that day in his office, under the hood. Then I opened my laptop and invoiced Hartwell Dynamics for the first milestone of our engagement. $47,500, net 30, payable to Meridian Brand Strategy LLC. I hit send. That invoice had my name on it. For the first time in 3 years, the work did too. Derek told me I executed his vision. He was wrong about a lot of things, but he was most wrong about that. I didn't execute anyone's vision. I built the vision. I built the methodology, the frameworks, the language, the entire strategic architecture that Crestline sold for 3 years. The only vision I was executing was my own, and I had just stopped lending it to someone who never deserved to borrow it. The IRS audit came 6 months later, 3 years of misclassifying project work, running personal expenses through client accounts, and some payroll irregularities that I had noticed and documented and quietly handed to Renata at the start of all this. She had filed a report with the appropriate channels. I didn't know exactly what would come of it. I didn't need to. Meridian is 2 years old now. We have 4 clients and 2 people on the team, including Priya, who left Crestline 8 months after I did. We work out of a small office in Wicker Park with good light and the coffee machine that actually works. No golf. No glass cube on the desk. No one telling me to stay under the hood. Derek still has a LinkedIn presence. He posts about leadership and authenticity. He has a lot of followers. I don't think about him much. Mostly when a new invoice clears and my name is on it and it's mine, completely mine, I think. This is what it was supposed to feel like all along. I was not the engine. I was the architect. And architects don't stay under the hood. They sign the building. There's a specific kind of quiet that settles over you after you've stopped fighting for someone who is never going to fight for you. I felt it the morning I sent that invoice to Hartwell Dynamics. Not triumph, exactly. Something calmer than that. Like a room that had been loud for years had finally gone still. I think about Derek sometimes, not with bitterness, but the way you think about a lesson that cost you more than it should have. He believed that credit was his to distribute or withhold, that because he owned the firm, he owned everything inside it, including the thinking I did at midnight, the frameworks I built before I ever walked through his door. The professional identity he told me, on a voicemail I saved, wasn't mine to claim. He was wrong on the law. But more than that, he was wrong about how things actually work in the long run. What happened to Derek wasn't bad luck. It was a direct consequence of a choice he made and kept making every year, every project, every delivery meeting he attended without me. He built his reputation on borrowed work and assumed the borrowing would never come due. It always does. That's not karma in any mystical sense. It's just the way systems fail. You can only extract without contributing for so long before the structure collapses under its own imbalance. Derek extracted for years. The bill came in the form of a 1-paragraph email Renata sent to Gerald Hartwell's personal address. What I learned, what I'm still learning, is that integrity isn't just a moral concept, it's a practical one. Every time I documented my frameworks, every time I saved a voicemail instead of deleting it, every time I told the truth about the work even when no one was crediting me for it, I was building something Derek couldn't touch. He could take the presentation. He couldn't take the paper trail. He could take the credit. He couldn't take the copyright. Doing the right thing, being honest about what I built, refusing to hide it even when hiding would have been easier, turned out to be the most strategic decision I ever made, even when I wasn't thinking of it as strategy. And there's something else I want to say about Renata because I think people underestimate what it means to be rigorous. She didn't win that case on charisma. She won it because she knew the law precisely, because she asked me the right questions, because she understood that Section 9 of a poorly drafted contract meant something specific and provable and actionable. Intelligence in service of a real problem is one of the most powerful things I've ever witnessed up close. I watched her read 42 voicemails and immediately understand what they meant. Legally, contextually, strategically. That kind of clarity, the discipline to actually understand your tools before you use them, is what separated a winnable case from a losing one. The hardest part was not the legal fight. The hardest part was the 3 years before it, when I kept showing up, kept doing the work, kept doing the persistence in the right direction would eventually be enough. It was enough. Just not in the way I expected. I didn't get recognized at Crestline. I got free from it. And the endurance I had built, all those late nights and covered for deadlines and saved voicemails, became the evidence, became the foundation of Meridian, became the reason Gerald Hartwell answered Renata's email and signed with me instead. You don't always get to see the return on what you build while you're building it, but the building is never wasted. I know that now in a way I couldn't have known it at 26, when I was just grateful to have the job. I am the architect I always was.